Steven Pinker on happiness. The pursuit of happiness is an inalienable right, says the Declaration of Independence. In its list of self-evident truths, the greatest happiness of the greatest number, wrote Jeremy Bentham, is the foundation of morality. To say that everyone wants to be happy sounds trite, almost circular, but it raises a profound question about our makeup, our nature. What is this thing that people strive for? At first, happiness might seem like just desserts for biological fitness, more accurately the states that would have led to fitness in the environment in which we evolved. We are happier when we are healthy, well-fed, comfortable, safe, prosperous, knowledgeable, respected, non-celibate, and loved. Compared to their opposites, these objects of striving are conductive to reproduction. The function of happiness would be to mobilize the mind to seek the keys to Darwinian fitness. When we are unhappy, we work for the things that make us happy. When we are happy, we keep the status quo. The problem is, however, how much fitness is worth striving for. Ice Age people would have been wasting their time if they had fretted about their lack of camping stoves, penicillin, and hunting rifles, or if they had striven for them instead of better caves and spears. Even among modern foragers, very different standards of living are attainable in different times and places. Lest the perfect be the enemy of the good, the pursuit of happiness ought to be calibrated by what can be attained through reasonable effort in the current environment. How do we know what can reasonably be attained? A good source of information is what other people have attained. If they can get it, perhaps so can you. Through the ages, observers of the human condition have pointed out the tragedy. People are happy when they feel better off than their neighbors, unhappy when they feel worse off. Ambrose Bierce once said, "Happiness is an agreeable sensation arising from contemplating the misery of others." Research on the psychology of happiness has borne out this. For example, you might open your paycheck and are delighted to find you have been given a 5% raise, until you learn that your coworkers have been given a 10% raise. And according to legend, people today are safer, healthier, better fed, and longer lived than at any time in history, yet we do not spend our lives walking on air, and presumably our ancestors were not chronically glum. It is not reactionary to point out that many of the poor in today's Western nations live in conditions that yesterday's aristocrats could not have dreamed of. People in different classes and countries are often content with their lot until they compare themselves to more affluent people. The amount of violence in a society is more closely related to its inequality than to its poverty. In the second half of the 20th century, the discontent of the Third World, and later the Second, have been attributed to their glimpses through the mass media of the first. The other major clue to the attainable is how well off you are now. What you have now is attainable by definition, and what chances that you can do at least a little bit better. Evolutionary theory predicts that a man's reach should exceed his grasp, but not by much. Here we have the second tragedy of happiness. People adapt to their circumstances, good or bad, the way their eyes adapt to sun or darkness. From that neutral point, improvement is happiness, loss is misery. Again, the sages said it first. The narrator of E.A. Robinson's poem and later Simon and Garfunkel's song envies the factory owner Richard Cory, who glittered when he walked. So on we worked and waited for the light, and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. The futility of striving has led many dark souls to deny that happiness is possible. For the show business personality, happiness is not something you experience, it's something you remember. Freud said that the goal of psychotherapy was to transform hysterical misery into common unhappiness. A colleague consulting with me by email about a troubled graduate student wrote, "Sometimes I wish I was young, then I remember that wasn't so great either." But here the other point of view comes across, that people do come to feel the same across an astonishing range of good and bad fortunes. But the baseline that people adapt to on average is not misery but satisfaction. The exact baseline differs, however, from person to person and is largely inherited. The psychologists David Myers and Ed Diner have found about 80% of people in the industrialized world report that they are at least fairly satisfied with life, and about 30% say they are very happy. As far as we can tell, the reports are sincere. The percentages are the same for all ages, for both sexes, for blacks and whites, and over 4 decades of economic growth. As Myers and Diner remark, compared with 1957, Americans have twice as many cars per person, plus microwave ovens, TVs, VCRs, air conditioners, entering machines, and $12 billion worth of new brand name athletic shoes a year. And so, are Americans happier than they were in 1957? They are not. Within an industrialized country, money buys only a little happiness. The correlation between wealth and satisfaction is positive but small. Lottery winners, after their jolt of happiness has subsided, return to their former emotional state. On the brighter side, do people who have suffered terrible losses, such as paraplegics and survivors of the Holocaust? These findings do not necessarily contradict the singer Sophie Tucker when she said, quote, "I have been poor and I have been rich. Rich is better," end quote. In India and Bangladesh, wealth predicts happiness much better than it does in the West. Among 24 Western European and American nations, the higher the gross national product, or GNP, per capita, the happier the citizen. Although there are many explanations for this, Myers and Diner point out that wealth is like health. Not having it makes you miserable, but having it does not guarantee happiness. The tragedy of happiness has a third act. There are twice as many negative emotions, fear, grief, anxiety, etc., as positive ones, and losses are more keenly felt than equivalent gains. The tennis star Jimmy Connors once summed up the human condition, quote, "I hate to lose more than I like to win," end quote. The asymmetry has been confirmed in the lab by showing that people will take a bigger gamble in order to avoid a sure loss than to improve on a sure gain, and by showing that people's mood plummets more when imagining a loss in their lives, for example, in course grades or in relationships with the opposite sex, than it rises with imagining an equivalent gain. The psychologist Timothy Ketelaar notes that happiness tracks the effects of resources on biological fitness. As things get better, increases in fitness show diminishing returns. More food is better, but only to a point. But as things get worse, decreases in fitness can take you out in the game. Not enough food and you're dead, of course. There are many ways to become infinitely worse off, from an infection, starvation, getting eaten, fall ad infinitum, and not many ways to become vastly better off. That makes prospective losses more worthy of attention than gains. There are more things that make us unhappy than things that make us happy. Donald Campbell, an early evolutionary psychologist who studied the psychology of pleasure, described humans as being on a hedonic treadmill, where gains and well-being leave us no happier in the long run. Indeed, the study of happiness often sounds like a sermon for traditional values. Obviously, there are no objective moral values. The numbers show that it is not the rich, privileged, robust, or even the good-looking who are happy, but it is those who have spouses, friends, religion, and challenging, meaningful work. The findings can be overstated because they apply to averages, not individuals, and because cause and effect are hard to tease apart. Being married might make you happy, but being happy might help you get and stay married. But Campbell echoed millennia of wise men and women when he summed up the research, quote, "The direct pursuit of happiness is a recipe for an unhappy life," end quote.